Super Bowl 51 in Atlanta, the greatest comeback of all time in Super Bowl history, where I had an idea going into that game what I was going to write. So I basically had a story written going into the game, and I was just waiting for it to play out. By halftime, I had to completely rewrite it, and then by the end of the game, I had to rewrite it again. So I wrote that Super Bowl story 3 times.
In this episode, I talked with Erik Scalavino. He was a journalist for the New England Patriots. We talked about the Patriots dynasty, his love of travel, and life of a sports writer. I hope you enjoy this episode with Erik Scalavino. Well, first off, I want to say thank you for coming on. I actually know you from the Patriots Unfiltered / PFW stuff. That's where I first met. Well, that's where I've not met, but that's whenever I first saw you. And then I liked a lot of the articles, especially about like the Nate Ebner, or I did read your 32 stadiums, but I've only ever been to one stadium. So can you just say a little bit about you? And then I do want to get into, like, since you used to be a Patriots writer, kind of what you're doing now, and go into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was with the Patriots for 16 years. The team that I grew up, watching and loving. I mean, I'm only a half hour away from Foxborough, and first started watching them when I was, I guess, about 12, 13 years old. The year they went to their first Super Bowl, actually,
Good
back
timing.
in yeah. I mean, that's when I had known about them before then, but that's when I really first started to get into watching on a weekly basis and just getting caught up in the whole hype of that playoff year and all those players from that era. So when I started working for them, it was literally a dream come true, and uh, it was right just after they won the first half of their dynasty, their first three uh, championships. So uh, I I just kind of thought, well, I'm kind of at the tail end here. There's no way I'm going to ever see that kind of success, and I was just happy when we finally made it back in 2014 and won that one, and then we won two more after that. So it was, yeah, it was surreal. It was to be part of that organization during the height of uh, their existence was. Honestly, sometimes I still think back and pinch myself that it actually happened. Um, and getting to do what I did, which was be sort of a fly on the wall and cover their every movement as a reporter, but being on the inside and being able to travel with them and um, experience what life was like pretty much as a player. Uh, you know, Going through the weekly preparation and following practices, and then going to games, home and away, and just uh, it was it, it couldn't have been it couldn't have happened at a more uh, thrilling time, obviously, when they were winning all those games and all those championships. And so getting to cover it firsthand, um, up close, was just it was just it was a thrill. It really was. There's no other way to explain it. But so after 16 years working there, I just got to a point where I was ready to start doing, other things while I still had time. Well, I tell people, while there was still time left on my clock, hopefully, I wanted to try and explore other things because as much as I love football, there are so many other things that I love too. And, I'm not getting any younger. So I said, if I don't take a chance now, um, I'll always regret it, and I had accomplished everything I could have ever dreamed of accomplishing while I worked there. So I left there with no regrets and um, no hard feelings toward anyone. I love my time there, but I also love the fact that I have the freedom now to try to explore other things that I want to try to get done. So that's where I am.
I gotcha. So, kind of, what are you doing now?
Right now, I'm kind of focused on. I have a freelance writing business that I've sort of set up for the time being, and I'm trying to build that, getting to write about a lot of different topics and help a lot of business people um, with their needs. A lot of speech writing, and things like that. Um, but I'm also looking. There are some other things that I want to do that are sort of travel related, that are in the works that I wouldn't have had the time to sort of
Hmm.
pursue if I was still, had a 9 to 5 sort of full time gig. So that's not really to announce anything yet. Things are still sort of in the planning stages, but
I gotcha.
um, I'm uh, I'm actively going after those now. Now that I have the time to do that.
So that seems like a dream. I mean, I know a lot of people like don't they have to work for money and all that, but
Mm.
they always want to go on a month vacation to go overseas or just go around the United States. I
Hmm.
know, like like pretty big into camping and stuff, and it would be amazing to go camping for a month or whatever, just kind of travel. But it's kind of work gets in the way, so I can
Hmm.
totally relate to that. But I mean, so I kind of want to since this is more sports related, I kind of want to like as a reporter, writer, and stuff for the Patriots. What was your like day to day kind of job responsibilities, or like how was a day to day of your work?
Well, it depended what time of year it was. Obviously, there were two. It was sort of like living two different lifestyles: in season
Hmm.
and off season. In season was the best way I could describe it was sprinting a marathon. That's kind of how it felt. Once training camp started at the end of July, all the way through the end of the regular season playoffs, most of the time the Super Bowl, where we were concerned. So it was, um, there's you fall into a routine though, because you've got, typically if it's, let's say it's the regular season, because that's what most of the, uh, you know, most of your time is spent during the regular season. It's uh, you get there in the morning. You've typically got a press conference um, or interview session that takes place with players or coaches. Um, we had our own podcast, which we did around midday, and then there'd be time to go out to practice and watch for a few minutes, uh, and then after all that, then you had a little bit of time to try to write all the stories that you had to do for the day. Most of my, I'd say the first dozen or so years that I worked there, I was doing daily beat reporting type of stuff. So I was covering really the nuts and bolts of practice, um, press conferences, uh, covering what the other team was doing. You have opposing teams press conference calls, and just writing the news of what's going on every day at practice and getting ready for that week's game. The last few years, though, I sort of transitioned to doing more long form human interest profiles on players, because that's kind of what I like to do best. Those are the stories I like to do, was to tell who these players were you know from a personal perspective, not just what they were doing on the field every day, but where they came from, what their backgrounds were, what their dreams for the future were. Just whatever the best story was for a person, I wanted to try to tell that story and get them to talk about it. So the last few years, I got to sort of focus more on that than on the daily nitty gritty things. And of course, we'd cover the games and do our analysis of that. That always was fun to go and watch a game and then write about it afterwards and come up with a catchy headline and sort of analyze what happened, why they won, why they lost. But for me, the most fun part was to sit down with a player for whatever length of time it took. Sometimes 10, 15 minutes, sometimes half hour, 45 minutes, an hour or more, just to get them to sort of, you know, unload their feelings on whatever you mentioned when we were talking earlier about some of the players who had some like really poignant things that happen in their lives, and getting them to open up and talk about those things sometimes, depending on the nature of the subject, was tougher than others. Like the Nate Ebner one you talked about, it took a few years for him to sort of really, asking to talk to him, and getting him really to a point where he was really comfortable to talk about his experience that I wrote about. But it was probably one of the most fulfilling things I ever did during my time there. So, um, those there were a lot of stories like that where, um, getting to know these guys on a human level, really made it more enjoyable to sort of to watch them, and to root for them as people, and not just as guys wearing a certain colored
Hmm.
uniform.
It's it's kind of like once you like it's like once you're kind of not really friends, but once you're more friendly with each other, they're not just like a video game player. They're actually an
Hmm.
actual person.
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah, it's strange to think that so many people invest so much time rooting for a team, and whoever happens to be wearing the
Mm.
jersey that year they root for, and then if they sign with another team, it's like, oh, forget it. It's an abstraction almost. Like, he's not wearing my colors or my logo, so I don't care who he is. But once you really dig deep, and yeah, you get a chance to have them divulge personal feelings or secrets, or things about their lives. You yeah you realize they're just like you or me. They just have a more high profile job. They
Hmm.
have a larger paycheck, a larger bank account, but they have loves, they have losses, they have struggles, they have desires, they have dreams, that go far beyond scoring touchdowns, winning games, winning Super Bowls, that kind of thing. So yeah, it makes it a lot more personal, and a lot more fulfilling when you get to know a player at that level, and can root for him, knowing what he's gone through, what he wants to do. Um, yeah, it's very rewarding.
Has there ever been a time whenever you like started a story or kind of started something that like what you expected was not even completely the same?
As far as you mean, like going in and,
Yeah,
and
like
having a certain story
hmm
idea, and
yeah.
then it changes. Um, yeah, I think the answer to that is yes. I'm trying to think of a specific example I can give you. Um, Typically, I would do my research ahead of time, and I would sort of take a nugget of something I found was interesting, and then sort of try to expand on that. Something I would see, for instance, like we'd have these the PR department would put out these called media guides. They're about like an inch to 2 inches thick, and every player has their section in there, and uh, the PR department tries to do their best to come up with sort of interesting factoids, and they put them in the media guide. And so what I would do, at the beginning of the year, I would flip through there, and I would say, all right, who do I want to try to focus on this year to try to do features on? And I would look, if I didn't really know much about them, I'd look through that first and sort of see, is there anything in there? And a lot of times there'd be like just maybe sort of a throwaway line about some interesting fact of their background, and then I would go and approach them and say, hey, I saw this about you in the media guide, and wondered if you wanted to talk about that, and uh, expand on that, and then that would sort of lead to depending on the answers that they would give, that would sort of lead to sometimes a bigger story than I had anticipated. Um, I mean, I'll think of a most recent one I can sort of go into was Jalen Mills, the cornerback. He's got the green hair, and so I think I kind of went into that just wanting to, I didn't really know much about him. I knew he'd played for the Eagles, and maybe that was why he had the green. But so in the process of interviewing him about that, I find out about his background and his life story, and you know a family member that he dedicated his life to, his career to, and the color green and what that meant to him. And you find out a lot of these things sometimes when when you're asking questions that they don't normally get asked, and topics they don't normally talk about. They typically it's like that week's opponent or the position, the competition that they're having in training camp. The player they're going up against that week, and it sort of gets for them a lot of times it's a business, and they understand that, and they have to put up with a lot of the same questions over and over every week or every day. And when you approach them, a lot of times I would go up to them and say, "Hey, do you have a few minutes to talk non-football related?" I would start with that so that they kind of knew, oh, okay, I don't have to go through the boring everyday stuff. And they're like, well, what about exactly? And then I would sort of get into it. And then, before you know it, they're sitting down and pulling up a chair, and, a half hour goes by, and they're like, yeah, it's almost cathartic for them a lot of times that they don't have to talk about football and talk about something other than that, because they're so, regular season especially, it's such an intense um, routine, a grind that one week looks very much like the last or the next, and just change the logo of the opponent you're playing, and it's really the same sort of rhythm, whether it's home or away, and then to break that sort of monotony and talk about them for once, or their you know something other than football. A lot of times for them it was a nice release, so I really enjoyed getting that out of players, and having them, you know it was almost like they were like they had this like pent up like wanting to talk about
Of
themselves. But
course.
especially with the Patriots, there's a lot of times there's a focus on the team and not on the individual, that they were discouraged from talking about themselves, or especially when it came to their playing
Mhm.
time, like
Yeah.
they didn't want to put the emphasis on them. So when they could talk about something other than football, um, it was nice for them. It was a nice change of pace. So um, it was good for them, and it was good for me, because I loved getting them to open up and talk about things about themselves and their lives that they don't, that that the everyday fan wouldn't necessarily know, and would get them to want to root for them more. If you're a fan of the team already, and then you find out, oh my God, this guy's got a great story, life story, or whatnot. I want to root for him even more. I want to make sure that I'm cheering for the person, not just the player. If you
That makes totally sense because I
will.
mean, you just kind of they're more like a friend. Like I said earlier,
Yeah,
it's like I mean that
exactly.
makes sense, and I'm sure a lot of football players just get tired of the same questions about the week.
Hmm.
Whenever it's, I mean, they're only there for the job,
Right,
but
right, and a lot of times you see that a lot, especially during Super Bowl week, or the 2 weeks actually. They get so many of the same
hmm
questions from because a lot of times at the Super Bowl, you're not just dealing with the reporters that you see every day. You're dealing with national or regional people from all over the world, and so everybody has the same questions that they want to come in. And so you might have just asked this, answered the same questions 3 days in a row, but they're coming yet again because it's a different reporter who hasn't heard you answer those things, and you haven't recorded it for them. So, yeah, there are times you can tell that
oh
they
yeah,
they have to really sort of get like, okay, here we go, this question again. But yeah, when it's something completely different, a lot of times they open up a lot more, and they're more personable. That you get more honest answers, because they're not having to worry about reading off a script in their minds
hmm
about like, oh, I can't say this and that about the other team, or my role this week, and that kind of thing. It's really nothing's off limits kind of when it comes to that. So yeah, the personal stories, the human interest stuff was, for me, it was a gold mine of storytelling, and I had carte blanche to write them as long or as short as I wanted, depending on how much access I got, how much material I had to work with. So yeah, I was really blessed where I had I worked for a boss in a department that allowed me to tell those stories without sort of limitation. So it was great.
Did you notice that players would kind of open up to you more once you started like asking other questions than just regular football questions, and
Yeah.
then they would kind of like hey, whenever were asking, they were like, oh, and then they started opening up a little bit more.
Yeah, well, and that's a lot of times why I would start off with, "Hey, do you have a few minutes? I want to talk about non-football related stuff." That automatically would be like, "Really? Like what?
That
Like what exactly do you want to talk to me about?" And then I would launch into it, and they were like, "Oh, okay, yeah." And then you could see almost like they would relax a little bit, because they weren't sort of like having to put on the football
yeah,
persona.
yeah, yeah.
They could sort of just be a normal person and just sort of sit back and talk. And yeah, and then then after a while, I started getting a reputation for writing these really in depth, sort of glowing personal features on players. And the PR department would actually, when I because in order to get it, a lot of times you'd have to make especially during the lockdown and with COVID, you had to make the arrangements through the PR department and
Hmm.
say, hey, I want to talk to this player about this topic, whatnot. And so they would sort of be the go between. And a lot of times they would go to the player and say, hey, this is Erik from the internal media, but he's the guy that wrote about Nate Ebner or Matthew Slater, or and they, oh yeah, that story, yeah, all right, yeah, I'll talk to him. So it was kind of nice, sort of being, they knew who I was, seeing me,
Hmm.
around the facility or on the team plane or in the hotel and whatnot. But once they knew my work, the kind of work that I did, they were, a lot more receptive too, because they knew I wasn't there to write a hit piece.
Yeah,
I wanted to just,
not like
I
a
wanted to do
gotcha.
a profile. Yeah, I wanted to talk about them. I just their story, and I think they appreciated that, and I appreciated their willingness to take part.
So, what got you into wanting to be like a reporter, or did it just happen, or did you always wanted to be a writer, recorder?
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I was always interested in journalism.
Hmm.
From when I was growing up, my family always bought the newspaper. Uh, when we had dinner at night, we would always have the news on, local news, national news. Back when 6 o'clock was the local news, 6:30 was the national news, and it was way before the 24-hour news
Yeah.
cycle and smartphones and the internet, and you really relied on your television set and the three networks at the time that were on, and that's how you got your news. So I grew up sort of fascinated by um, people who told stories. I've always loved good stories, and books, news, magazines, and so. Um, but I didn't go to school for it. I didn't. My background, my training wasn't in journalism. It was in, ironically, business management, something completely different, and um, something that I'm not at all involved in now. But I just always loved good stories, and I would read good writing, um, and I would sort of I'd look at a story and sort of analyze, why did I like that story so much? What was it about? I'd sort of, like, in my mind, sort of break down like how it started, how the story, how the reporter started the story, or
Hmm.
how the author started it. What was it about the story that I loved? If it was a book, I loved authors who at the end always had a sort of a cliffhanger at the end of a chapter
Yep.
that made you want to, even if you were tired and exhausted, you're like, God, I got to keep reading the next chapter because it's such a great, I loved that sort of way of telling stories. And subconsciously, I was sort of in my mind developing my own style. Um, but when I got out of college, after I got my business degree, the first job that I applied for, I applied to a lot of different things because I was interested in so many different industries and lines of work. And the first one that came back was at a radio station. They offered me a job, and that's how I got into broadcasting. And it just so one job led to the next one, and that eventually led to getting the job with the Patriots. And it's ironic when I look back on it. When I was back in prep school, the probably, if you ask my teachers back then, what the biggest knock on my schooling career was that um, I wasn't a very elaborate writer. I was just sort of a very, write as quickly as possible and get to the story, get to the point as quickly as possible, which was great at the beginning of my career because I was working in news and broadcast news, and you're writing really tight, short scripts. Just get to the point. Here's what happened. Just get to it. 20, 30-second copy, and that's kind of how I wrote when I was a student. I just wanted to get to the point. I wasn't known for, if they said you had to have 3 to 5 pages, I would write 2 pages and one line on the third page. The shortest amount that I could do, that's all I wanted to do. And it's sort of ironic now that I've become known for writing these really long, expansive pieces, because it's just not how my career started. But it sort of evolved into that, because, like I said, I just loved telling a story, and I love giving a story the room that it needs to breathe. And I was so fortunate to have so many opportunities to tell great stories, with the Patriots. And now I sort of on the side, in my spare time, I turn that into writing about my travels, which I love travel writing, which was something I didn't really know was a genre, when I was growing up. I just always assumed that people were writers and they wrote about whatever they were assigned to write about. I didn't realize that you could specialize in just sports or just travel or just business. Like, there were these niches, these sort of buckets that you could be a specialist in. It never really occurred to me until I got into the business of journalism that was something you could do. And so now, for fun, I started writing about, the trips that I went on or the experiences I had outside of football. And that has sort of helped get me to where I am now in my freelance career, where, I can write about pretty much anything because, my career as a journalist, that's what you do as a journalist. You a lot of times you don't know the subject matter that you're writing about, and a good journalist has to do his homework or her homework, and through interviews and research and background. And the best way to learn something is to write about it, because you have to in order to write something and explain to an audience, you have to know it as the writer. You have
Okay.
to know it at least well enough to explain it.
Hmm.
So, if I'm writing a story about astronomy, I'm not an astronomer, so I have to do so much background research and interview astronomers and learn about the subject in order to write a compelling story about it. That, at least for that article, I'm somewhat of a minor expert on it for the subject that I'm writing about. And that uh, you know that sort of became what I was known for with the Patriots, was finding these niche stories about these players and their lives, and you sort of become a little bit of an expert on them because you're doing all this background research and talking to them about their particular, um, point of interest. Guys who want, like, I'll give you a perfect example, like Chris Long. You remember Chris Long from, the one year that he played for the
Yep.
Patriots, but he was an NFL player for a long time. His dad is Howie Long. Um, the story I wrote about him was, how he went to Africa and was so inspired by his trip there that he started this foundation, this charitable foundation to, help people, in these villages get access to clean water. Um, just the whole story of how that happened to him, required me to do so much background research on that subject, about, uh, you know, what life is like in these remote areas, and what it takes to draw well water from underground. And, like, I had to do all of this research because of this one story that I was doing. So, to me, that was fascinating. And so now in my freelance work, when I get contacted by a business person who says, hey, I need to, I'm in this line of work and I need to write a speech about this sort of thing. It's just like writing an article, writing a story about it. Only it's in a speech form, or, um, a professional journal that I'm writing, like ghostwriting on behalf of them. But it's all the same. It's the same set of tools that I acquired throughout my career, my almost 3 decades now, in journalism. It's those kind of skills are all applied now into what I'm doing, and what I did do uh, in my work with the Patriots.
Has all of that experience made you appreciate traveling more and seeing different, just different how people live?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I love I always I was very fortunate when I was growing up. I had a family that loved to travel and did whenever we could. So I got exposed to that at a very young age. And then the job with the Patriots allowed me to go on the road with them um, for for so many years that I was getting to see parts of the country um, that a lot of people don't get to experience on a regular basis. And I was doing it every year, and so I took full advantage of every road trip we went on, to sightsee, to go to great restaurants, to just to sort of anytime you can break out of your normal routine and go see something different, and a change of scenery is sometimes the best medicine for what ails us, and getting to do that as part of my job, and then in the off season getting to travel on my own for pleasure, you know and it really opened my eyes to just what a big world we have, and how different parts of the world are, but also how similar people are around the world. When it comes down to the basic needs, everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants to have a fulfilling career and a family and friends, and that doesn't change no matter where you go around the world. There we have a lot more in common than we do in contrast for the most part, and you really learn that when you get to travel. But um, and so yeah, I absolutely love that part of the job, and that part of my personal life too. And so I take advantage of that whenever I can. Um, I certainly got a chance to do more of that than I ever imagined when I took that job, and it led to what I hope is going to be part of the next chapter of
I gotcha. I gotcha. When, like, speaking of travel, what's your favorite place to travel?
my life. Huh. That's
I
such a
know,
tough
I know
question.
it's there's so many places probably, but
It really is. It's such a tough question because it. I don't know if you have kids or not, but it'd almost be like asking a parent to name their favorite child. You love them all equally and differently. You love them for who they are individually, and it's so impossible to say. I mean, I've had great travel experiences everywhere I've been. I can't really say that I've had a bad experience anywhere. I mean, there are things that you miss a flight, or you have a bad meal somewhere or whatever, but those are minor things. But like just being able to be healthy enough to go to different places uninhibited, have access to um, experiences, people, places. Um, it's such it, it's such a luxury being able to travel and to see different places and experience these things that I it's really hard to pick one favorite. I mean, there's certainly I've certainly had great experiences that I'll never forget, and there are certainly places that I've been to them once and that's more than enough. um, but that's not to say that I didn't have a good time there. It's just that there are certainly places that I would love to go back to more and more, um, and places that might surprise you. Like you know, because I work for the Patriots, we got to play the Bills every year, and I got to go to Buffalo at least a dozen times, and that place really grew on me. Western New York um, is a place that really gets like a bad rap, but if you go there and you know what to do, and like I went there so many times that it's like, all right, what do we do differently now? We're going back to Buffalo, and like there's so many great things to do out there that I think most people wouldn't know unless you actually took the time to investigate it. If you were going to be out there for 3, 5, 7 days, there's there's some great things to do out there. And like people like look at me sort of crossways, like you like going to Buffalo, and I'm like, When when you when you're faced with that, when you know you're going to a place and you're going to be there for a certain amount of time, you don't want to be bored.
Yeah.
And one thing I learned was there's always great food to be found no matter where you go. You just have to know where to look.
Hmm.
And there are always interesting and exciting things to do no matter where you go, because you just have to look. You just have to know where to look. And the best thing to do is to ask people who live there,
Yep.
because they're the ones who know everything about the place, and they're the ones who are excited to show off where they live, because um, nobody wants to feel bad about where they live or where they come from. They want to show off the great things about it, and a place like Buffalo, and I'm just using that as an example. Like, people might be surprised to think like that there are great things to do in Buffalo, but I could take you there for a week and you would have the time of your life. And that just comes from the experience of having been there so many times and knowing and doing my homework, doing my research, having done a lot of the things that I would show you around to do. You can have a great experience traveling no matter where you go. It's just a matter of putting in the time to learn about what there is to do and see, and leaning into those local connections. So that's where you really get to where you get to mine those great experiences. It's from those people who live there and can show you around, and who are excited to do that. So yeah, I mean, but I will say to get back to your original question, there are certainly places that stand out. Um, you know, East Africa is one that I can't wait to go back there again. Anyone who's ever been on a safari will tell you it's it's a life changing event. Um, Going to Italy with my parents, and seeing their where their families came from, that had definitely an emotional and sentimental value to me. Um, Going to France, it was the first time I ever went on a solo trip by myself. Um, that was meaningful to me. So each trip has its own you know meaningful, poignant, sentimental value, but for different reasons.
Mhm.
So
Makes
it's
sense.
hard to yeah, it's hard to say with that. It's hard to say one trip is the best or better than in the other. They're all great. They're just great in different
Yeah.
ways.
Uh, just out of curiosity, what was it like traveling to France solo? I mean, do you speak French at all,
Hmm.
or okay?
Yeah, yeah. It was. I grew up in a multilingual household. My dad is from Italy, so uh, I grew up speaking both English and Italian, um, and I always had sort of an aptitude for foreign languages, and I studied French in school for about 6 years, so I got to be pretty good at it, and I actually considered doing a study abroad semester. It didn't end up working out at the time, but um, I never lost my love for speaking foreign languages. And actually, whenever I go on a trip somewhere, if I'm going to a non-English speaking country, I always buy a phrase book and try to learn some of the basics before I go there, so I can at least have some sort of a foundational knowledge of what to say, what's being said, how to get around, and um, how to order a meal at a restaurant, or how to deal with some a shopkeeper if you're going into to buy something. Basic stuff like that. Just it adds to your experience. So, but because I had such a solid, you know, educational background in French, it was someplace I always wanted to go to, and I thought, what better place to go on my own than a place where they don't speak English, and I will have to rely on speaking French the whole time. And luckily, I had kept my textbooks from when I was a student there. So for like 3 or 4 months beforehand, I went back and started at page one and sort of did a refresher course, and um, a lot of it came flooding back. But then once you're immersed into it in the country, when no one is speaking English, um, after like 3 or 4 days, you start hearing things differently, and you start picking it up again, and before you know it, you're having full on conversations with people. um, so it was great. It was really exciting to like you never really truly feel like you're traveling somewhere until you're out of your element completely. And uh, that was such a great um, experience for me. Being alone, having to rely on my language skills, and making friends, making connections that way. Uh, that was one of the most memorable experiences of my life. And falling back on my language skills really helped for those 2 weeks that I was there. And by the end of it, it was it was almost like I was back in school again when I had that 6 years of knowledge built up. It's amazing how much you learn when you're thrust into it. You sort of it's sink or swim.
Yeah, you kind of have to
You
learn it.
kind of you have to, or else you're not going to be able to. You're going to be helpless at that point. So, no, it was thrilling, and I would recommend to anybody who, if you're going somewhere and you don't know the language, you buy a phrase book and you put in the time. Everybody, even if you have a job, you have a lunch
Mhm.
hour, right?
Yep.
Spend your lunch hour while you're eating. Flip through the phrase book for a half hour, 40 minutes. Do that every day for 2 or 3 months, and you'll be surprised how much you can learn before you go away on your trip. And you know, even if you just learn the basics: hello, goodbye, please, thank you, yes, no, hello. Uh, that will get you that will open up so many doors for you when when somebody sees that you're making an effort to
Yep.
speak their language. They're going to go out of their way to help you, and you're going to have um, so many more valuable interactions with people than you otherwise would have if you just burst into a room and assume that everybody speaks your language. you know I turn it around to people. I say, think about when you're here in this country, and you walk into a Walmart or some store, and you're hearing somebody speaking Chinese or Spanish or some other language, and you look at them sideways, and you're like, come on, man, you're in America, speak English. Well, think about it that way. When you're in their country and you're speaking English, like, you're not speaking their language, you know. So think of it from that point of view and put yourself in from that perspective. And when you're making the effort, people are going to go out of their way to help you. So that's one of the best travel tips I can give anybody who wants to do that.
Yeah, I've always been like I haven't went overseas yet, but I've always wanted to. But my biggest thing that I'm afraid of is like thinking I'm being disrespectful because I haven't learned their language, and I would hate that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, just learn that's the best thing I can tell you. Just get a basic knowledge, and it's not as difficult as it sounds. Half hour a day, flip through the phrase book, especially one if you get one that gives you like phonetic pronunciations. That way you can, or there's certainly plenty of online or language apps you can learn. Um, that before you know it, you can put like minor little phrases together. How much does this cost? You know, I'd like to order this, or where is where's the post office? You can put small little phrases together, and they'll notice that you're not from around there. So they'll speak slowly enough, clearly enough, so that they'll understand. They'll point, they'll use their sign language. So it you can I would just say, don't sell yourself short. You can make it happen if you really want to.
I gotcha. So just because it's one of my favorite things that you guys did on the podcast is the voice impressions. How has learning different languages helped you with voice impressions?
Oh, fantastic! I mean, it's well, yeah, because each if you want to speak a different language properly, you have to sort of adopt that sort of tone, or that there's a rhythm uh, to each language has a different cadence to it, and once you're immersed into it, again, you're hearing native speakers doing it, you sort of instinctively pick up on it. And yeah, that certainly helps if you're trying to sort of mimic. Yeah, when you're trying to speak a language properly, you're actually having to try to be like you're imitating that voice, because it's not one that you're naturally used to. So, um, yeah, I would say that was a huge help.
I gotcha. Okay. What Were you always on the podcast or from the
I
very beginning?
Yeah, well, my first year there, I was actually doing video production my first year with the team. Um, but my second year was when I started actually becoming a writer and a staff writer and a member of the podcast. So pretty much the whole time I was there. I mean, except for that first year when I was you know just getting my feet wet and learning everything. Um, but yeah, for the most part, I was there from the outset. But they had already been an established podcast for a lot longer than I had been there. So I sort of had to jump in, and they were already an established team. I had to sort of find my my place there.
What was that like on learning? Kind of, I mean, you guys had people call in and stuff like that. How was that learning? Like how to deal with people in that sense instead of just athletes?
Um, as far as like callers
Yeah,
and
just
email
random
just random
callers and
people
stuff.
calling
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, I again, you have to sort of you have to remember that I was one of those people for a
Hmm.
long time. I was a fan of the team growing up, and I always looked up to people who were in that industry who got to report on the NFL or professional sports in general, and um, I was one of those people in the crowd. I was one of those fans in the stands, who used to like look down um, and see the media, assembling in the back of the end zone at the old Foxborough Stadium at the end of the game as they got ready to do their post game interviews. They would all that's how the setup was back in the old days. You gather at the back of the end zone with 5 minutes left in the game, and then when the game ended, they'd let you into the locker room, and I'd see these faces that I only saw on television or names that I'd see in newspaper or print, and I'd say, "Wow, what a great job those people have." So I understood what it was like to be one of those people who was on the other side of it, and wanting to be over there. So I really appreciated where fans came from and the passion that they had for their team, and I tried not to forget that. There were times when like any job, you get into a routine and the novelty wears off after a while, but um, the fans always remind you that you know you're in a great position. You're blessed to be where you are, and um, how much there are so many people out there who would die to be in your position. And so it was in that way it was very humbling, but it also was a great reminder not to take for granted what you had. Um, some of them were a little extreme. Some of them
Of
were
course.
yeah, but I got to meet a lot of them because in our travels there were obviously we had fan groups all over the country, all over the world, and whenever we'd go on the road, a lot of times you'd end up meeting these folks, and it was that was the surreal part for me, Gabe, was when somebody would come up to me and recognize me and be like it. I never got used to that. Honestly, it was. I never thought of myself as somebody worth being recognized, if that makes sense. But so it always took me by surprise whenever somebody would come up and say, "My God, I know you," and I'd be like, "Yeah, that never wore off. I never got used to that, and that always, I always made it a point to try to ask them who they were, where they came from, why they became a Patriots fan, and um, just make them feel like they're having a great connection with somebody from their favorite team, because a lot of times that's as close as they'd get to somebody, they'd never get to meet a player. So we were sort of like the go-between, and we were sort of their connection to the team. And so it was real. It really was an honor to be there for as long as, especially like I said, during that time period, when we became, the the team that everybody eventually ended up hating, because but you'd rather be the team that everyone hates because you win than the team that everybody loves because you never win. And we certainly had our share of those years, so um, I don't regret that at all.
One thing that I've always been curious on is like whenever people write a article for a game, how does that process go? Do you just like write down notes during the game, or is it just you just write out an article as a flow of the game is going on?
I'd say every reporter probably has their own system that they use. I mean, for me, it was a lot of times I would go into a game because you've had a week to think about it, to analyze it. What are the storylines going in? What are the expected matchups? Um, how do we think this is going to play out? So you've had several days to sort of mull it over, and then now how does that match up with what actually happens during the 60 minutes? So what I would do is I would go in with sort of a theme in mind, like, okay, what's the theme for this week? What's the story? What's the main storyline? And then how did it play out during the game? And I would take notes during the game, um, on my laptop as each play would go on, and quarter by quarter and so but at halftime I would start putting a shell of the story together, um, and then of course in the second half, the last 5 minutes of the game could completely
Yeah.
change everything, and that happened more times than I'd like to remember. But the most memorable case was Super Bowl 50. Which one was it now? Super Bowl 51 in Atlanta,
Yep.
the greatest comeback of all time in Super Bowl history, where I had an idea going into that game what I was going to write. So I basically had a story written going into the game, and I was just waiting for it to play out. By halftime, I had to completely rewrite it, and then by the end of the game, I had to rewrite it again. So I wrote that Super Bowl story 3 times.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the most reworking I ever had to do on a story.
Jeez. Yeah.
But yeah, but generally you have sort of a theme going in. You're taking your notes, you're sort of building it as you go. I mean, at the beginning, I didn't nearly have that system in place. I was, God, I look back on it now and I think, what a complete inefficient waste of time. Because I used to like kind of just sit there and watch the game intently, and then afterwards I would write it from scratch after the
Oh.
game ended, and that would take me 3 4 hours afterwards to get a story done. But after a while I was like, this is just ridiculous, especially for night games. You're
That.
filing it like 3 4 5 in the morning. It's like, this is insane. So I finally developed the system that worked for me, which was like, write as much as possible during the game and then just sort of tweak it afterwards. And so it got to the point where, especially like on a road game, where we'd have to be on the plane, an hour and a half after the game ended, we'd be on a plane heading back home. I would have my story written, posted before I even got on the plane. So within an hour after the game ended, I have a story completely up, written, and on the web or on your app, and so I had it down to a science at that point.
Wow. Okay. I have two questions.
Sure.
One on that article about the 32 stadiums. Well, I think it was
Hmm.
actually more than 32, but uh, what was the process in that on, and how long did it take you to actually write it? Did you like always think about like writing that years
Well, yeah,
before, or
I had actually written that was a 2.0 version, the one
okay?
that you read. That's on Patriots.com. Ranking all 32 NFL road trips is what it was called. I had written a first version of that about 10 years ago, when at that time I had been to every NFL city except for four. And I decided, well, I've been to most of them. Let me do a story. Let me rank the 28 that I have been to. And in my intro, I made it clear I've been to every one except for these four, so I'm going to rank all the other ones. And I did it sort of just for fun. And because it's one of the most common questions I would get asked from people
I'm
when
sure.
would say, "Oh, you get to travel with the team too? Where's your favorite place to travel?" And so after a while, I got to thinking, well, you know what? I should just put put my thoughts down on paper. And it was a fun exercise because, as I was, telling you earlier, where there's so many fun things to do in so many different places around the world. When I sat down and wrote that story, it really got me thinking, like, God, there really are a lot of great things to do in places that you never would have imagined. And just it was fun to go back and think about all the places I'd been, like great restaurants, great tourist experiences, um, you know, fancy hotels we'd stayed in, and all these things. And I was thinking, God, you know, it was really tough. It was tough to put a ranking together because there were so many. It was hard to say this place was better than that one, or this one ranks above that one. It was tougher than you would think. And then by the time I had at the end of last year, I had been to all of them except for Los Angeles. So thanks a lot, COVID. I would have been there 3 times if it weren't for that. But with the restrictions in place, I didn't get to travel the last 2 years. So um, I would have been to all of them, and then Vegas this year. Um, but I just loved the idea of there are so many people who love football and love to travel to see their teams in different places that I thought, let me help them. Let me put a little travel guide together and say, hey, if you're going to any one of these places, here's what you need to know. Here are the basics you need to know to make your travel experience that much better. I've already been there. I've already done that. I can tell you exactly what it's like. So I can save you the trouble. So that was kind of my thinking in putting it together. But it took me, I mean, that piece was like, I think about 7,000 words long. So I was working on that every day, at least for, a couple of hours a day for, a good 3 or 4 months, tweaking it, reworking it, um, going back and thinking, do I really want to put this place ahead of that one? Or is this place too low? Is this place too high? Um, and it's all subjective,
Yeah,
obviously,
of course.
but it was such a fun thing to do, and hopefully people get something out of it if they're, um, you know, again, like I was a fan before I got the job with the Patriots. I had a group of football rabid friends who, every year we would go on a road trip to see the Patriots play someplace different. It was just a fun tradition that we had started for like 10 years before I even started working there. So I had already had a base of traveling to NFL games before I started doing it for a living. And so I used to be the one who would plan out, flights, hotels, things to do, places to eat. I was already doing all that stuff before I became a professional at it. And so it just made sense to sort of, put like a sort of travel guide together and to help other fans um, who wanted to do the same thing, because I know there are a lot of them out there. I've met them all over the country whenever we've gone to games. There are fan groups all over the place that you know that are really excited about going places. I mean, next year Germany is a great place. I would have loved to have knocked that one off of my list too, but someone else will get the thrill of experiencing seeing a game in Munich or Frankfurt or wherever they're going to play that game. Um, and yeah, hopefully the list that I came up with helps for those people who want to go and make it their own tradition to go and see their favorite team around the country. It's a great way to see the U.S. And to do it you can do it even if you're on a budget, you can do it. It's a reasonable travel um, excursion to make it. A long weekend, a whole week, you can go for the game and stay for all the other things that are fun to do and have a nice little diversion.
Yeah, I mean, after reading that, I was thinking like I've always wanted to go to all the stadiums and stuff, and then I was like, "Man, I might just use that as a guide to see because I've been to two football games and they were both at Arrowhead, so
Hmm.
I would like it would be cool to go to different kind of games,
Yeah, and
and
the
you did
vibe
all the
is
hard
totally
work.
different. Yeah, well, but hopefully it helps. I really do. I hope it encourages and inspires you and others to do that, because it's such a rewarding thing, especially if you're going with like-minded folks, people who either support your team or even if they don't. If like, yeah, I had friends who were fans of the other team, and we specifically go to see their team in their stadium. And that was a great thing too, because I've been to plenty of non-Patriot games at other stadiums, and to see what that dynamic is like was always great too. So yeah, I hope you do get to do it someday, Gabe. And if you have friends who love football and love to travel, get them to go with you, and make a trip out of it.
Yeah, I got to go to that AFC Championship versus in 2018 versus the Chiefs, and my
God.
buddy was a Saints fan,
Hmm.
so we got to watch that non-pass interference call and in the
Wow.
stadium. So it was kind of
Yeah.
neat, like
Yeah. Yeah.
neat
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
But real quick on, I know in an
My battery's
article.
about to die, by the way, on my computer. I just so if I disappear on you, that's why. So I
Okay, well, I
apologize in
mean,
advance.
if that's fine. If that's the case, do you want to shout out anything or anything? Say anything?
um, just I would say, thanks for having me on. First of all, it's been fun to reminisce about the good old days, especially now that things are starting to change a little bit up in Foxborough now. We don't know what the future is going to be like, but it's been a tough couple of years, over there, and it's more towards the years that I remember when I was a kid growing up watching them. So, I mean, I certainly don't think it's going to ever be as bad as it was back in like the late '80s, early '90s. I don't think it'll ever be like that again. But I'm glad that the Patriots have now a worldwide fan base, because that's something I never could have imagined would have been possible when I was a kid, being one of the only people in the stands when they were going 1-15 and 2-14, uh, and thinking about what a laughing stock we were, and now we're one of the most valuable sports franchises in all of the world. It's sort of surreal, but um, you know, I'm glad that we have. Um, I'm glad that we had the success we had, and that I was a little part of it for a little while.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, and it was nice talking to you.
Thank you, Gabe. Appreciate it.